Hey guys, it's Sarah with Sarah Speaks, and today we're going to be talking about news deserts, nonprofits, and free speech. So I'm sure most of you have heard that about a week ago, this article came out saying Prince Harry hates the press, so why is he trying to buy it up, essentially? And I think this goes a lot deeper than Meghan and Harry or Harry and Meghan. And not only that, I think it also goes towards those threads that we keep on talking about the threads between everyone. This is a little bit of a rabbit hole. I am going to try and keep it short because it looks like you guys prefer shorter videos, which is fine. So I'm going to try to get through it somewhat quickly. But I just was like, why is he doing this? He actually came out and said it is his life's work. Now I'm paraphrasing that he wanted to change the media. And from what we've seen, changing the media to Harry and Meghan is suppressing the voices that they don't like or they think are incorrect and uplifting the voices that are in favor of them. Now, that's my opinion. That's just what I've seen out and about. But it made me question, why are they doing this now and how long has this been in play? Now, we know from 2020 when they first left the royal family that they said that you know, they wanted to change the media. They were upset with the media. Now, free press is free press. It's free voices. Whether you like what those people say is irrelevant. Whether it's truthful is somewhat irrelevant as well, because you need to think for yourself and critically analyze what stories that you are looking at and whether or not those stories are true. So, when there's a free press, there actually is a free bit of critical thinking, and people are allowed to think for themselves. But I wanted to find out who these people are that he was attaching himself to. So, I'm going to go to a little further down in the article who he's involved with. And I say he, but it's actually Archewell Foundation. So, it's the foundation. And I find it a little interesting that Harry is the one being associated with this by the press, ironically enough, yet Meghan and Harry are both involved with the Archewell Foundation. Obviously, it's their foundation. So it's actually the Archewell Foundation that is donating money to a organization, and we're going to get there because this all ties into her Nigerian roots as well. The dive is interesting, so just stick with me here. So I just wanted to point out, so it's actually the Archewell Foundation, and alongside 20 other donors will with the aim of subsidizing failing local newsrooms across America. And they've already pledged $500 million and hope to eventually raise $1 billion in the next 5 years. Now, the push to subsidize local newsrooms across the United States, and I'm only going to deal with the United States, has been going on since probably about 2018, 2019. So that was when they were still in the royal family. Because really, local news organizations are dying. And I just want to, and they're creating what are called these news deserts. And I just want to read to you some definitions of what a news desert is. And it says news deserts are media desert or a news desert is essentially an uncovered geographical area that has few or no news outlets and receives little coverage. And this can actually be in rural areas. A lot of times it is in rural areas, but it's urban areas too. Another definition is a geographic area lacking in fresh local news and information. And then perhaps more Alarming is the definition from the Center for Innovation and Sustainability in Local Media, which is with the School of Media and Journalism and the University of North Carolina, is a community, either rural or urban, with limited access to the sort of credible and comprehensive news and information that feeds democracy at the grassroots level. So that last statement actually shows, yes, free press feeds democracy at the grassroots level, but he who controls the press controls the democracy. And at that point, is it a democracy anymore? So I just wanted to let you know. So according to a study in 2018, like I said, I'm still looking over here, by the UNC School of Media and Journalism, more than 1,300 communities in the US are considered news deserts. And those are actually deserts where there's no news outlets at all. There are other communities that have what they call ghost newspapers or ghost news outlets. And those are actually outlets that maybe have one or two people. They're stretched so thin they cannot cover everything. Now, I remember I actually live in a news desert, and more than 20 years ago, I was a local reporter for local government. And at that time, there were no less than about 4 journalists from 4 different publications actually sitting in the Board of Supervisors rooms covering those meetings. Now, what happens is there's essentially one newspaper and one online outlet who cover those meetings, and they don't go to them, they actually watch them online. And that's where local public access television studios, which are created, I mean, like I said, this goes into a weird deep dive, which are created by the Cable Act in the 70s and 80s, are important because a lot of those some are nonprofits, some are actually government departments. And what they do is they film local government meetings for government transparency and then put them online and put them on their television channels. I'll do a deep dive eventually on free speech and associated with public access as well. But those are actually public access organizations. They are free speech organizations. They are not news organizations unless there are community members who want to come in and do a news program. So they are not supposed to be news organizations. Now, when you look at the actual news organizations, they are now in these news deserts and ghost areas. They are relying on local government to put their meetings online for government transparency. Some local governments don't put them online, they can't afford to. And this then becomes an issue because then you actually have to go to meetings or zoom in to actually see what's happening in the meetings. So government transparency then has gone away. So that's just one aspect of all this. But let's get back to this need for these news deserts to be alleviated, these ghost deserts or ghost areas to be alleviated for local news to become local news. One of the issues, too, is there's very much an economic issue. Reporters don't get paid hardly anything. And one of the things you noticed always years ago, not so much now because newspapers essentially dying, but you would go to the parking lot and you would always know who the journalists' cars were as opposed to the actual ad salespeople, because it was the ad salespeople who had the really nice cars, and the journalists had either clunkers or very like fiscally responsible cars because they couldn't afford anything else. So there is this issue too of being paid for your work and being able to sustain that. People don't realize most journalists are freelance. I could go into a deep dive with that. But in about 2019, grants were starting to be given out from nonprofit organizations, foundations, to help subsidize and carry on the dissemination of local information within these news deserts. So that's what I want to get to, because this is what Archewell Foundation has connected itself to. They are not innovators here. And as we have seen through their behavior, since they left the royal family in particular, they do not innovate. This couple does not innovate, but they do attach themselves to organizations. And I think sometimes there's a long game playing, which is what it seems like with this. They want to connect themselves to the players. So before we get to the next news site, I would encourage you to go over and actually read this article from the Telegraph that was released. Gosh, it wasn't a week ago, it was 2 weeks ago. And I think you have to remember that Harry is always well, not always, but he mentions how bonkers the First Amendment is. And that is very frightening, especially for somebody who has an organization who is now attaching itself to grants for small news organizations throughout the country. But the organization that they've attached themselves to is this organization called Press Forward. So let's go over to Press Forward, which, big bold letters, right? Democracy flourishes when people have access to reliable information. People have access to reliable information when the money that is supporting them is not tainted. One of the things you have to remember is that in traditional newsrooms, the advertising staff was not allowed to mix with the editorial staff. And that was so that there was no bleed through between who was paying for advertising and what stories were being reported. So let's just scroll down here. And, it's very insightful language, right? Today we're experiencing a crisis in news information. Yes, this is true. Local newsrooms have disappeared. That's just what we were looking at over here. 1,300 communities in the U.S. are considered news deserts. There are only 1,600 public access studios left when there used to be 2,500. So there's a lot of changes within this arena. So they tell us this is why a coalition of funders is taking action. So let's go over and read the announcement. Okay. So we find out initially Press Forward is a arm, so to speak, of the MacArthur Foundation. What do we know about the MacArthur Foundation? They've been around for many, many, many years. If you watch PBS, you'll see that a lot of their documentaries, a lot of their programs are actually supported by the MacArthur Foundation. They are a very well-known and actually very well-respected foundation. And they have supported a lot in the arts and humanities and the news world. So this tells us Press Forward, again, we saw this earlier, will award more than $500 million to revitalize local news. Now, one of the issues I have with this is this a one-time payment? What do you do with ongoing issues? Newspapers are supported by advertising, just like television broadcasters are. And the minute you don't have the advertising, you don't have ongoing financial stability. So this says a national coalition of donors catalyzes local news and information for stronger communities. Coalition of 22 donors. And of course, we know Archewell is one of them. And of course, they go into 20% of Americans living in news deserts. Since 2005, it says approximately 2,200 local newspapers have closed. When you read it, basically the Press Forward with the aim of deploying significant news resources to the field through greater coordination and peer learning. So coordination, who's coordinating and who are they coordinating with? This is informed by insights and feedback from leaders and practitioners in the field. This multi-funder collaborative aligned on a set of shared values to guide their grant making. So shared values, whose shared values are these? Are these the shared values of actually encouraging free speech and free press? Or is it the shared values of imposing your own beliefs into the press? Just a question. So then we find, right, that the initial means there's probably going to be more partners. Press forward partners are the Archewell Foundation, Carnegie Corporation, Community Foundation of the Land of Lincoln, the Knight Foundation, a lot of big players, right? I find it interesting that they've actually listed this in alphabetical order, which made me think to myself, I wonder if Meghan and Harry, Meghan in particular seems to be very strategic. If you look at her life in general, she is a social climber and she has figured out how to get from rung to rung, and you have to be strategic and plan things to get there. And I wonder if she named Archewell Foundation with the first letter of A so that they could be the first in any sort of alphabetical list. I don't know. Sometimes, um, most times actually, these lists are done by donors. I mean, how much somebody donates. Now, I would guess these are really big players, the Carnegie Corporation, a really big player. I would guess Archewell Foundation, because they do not have that much in the bank, according to their tax receipts, the IRS filing. I would say that they are not donating very much in comparison to these other people. But I wanted to point out this. We're going to scroll down in a second, but after I just want to point out again that these grants are given to these news organizations collaboratively to align on a set of shared values. Sorry, I'm like bouncing around today because I want to get to actually something else that I think you're going to find is actually super interesting, especially with how strategic Meghan Markle is. At least that's what it looks like. Anyway, let's go all the way down here because what it says. So, Press Forward is independent of ideology and plans to work with More Perfect, a bipartisan initiative that is advancing 5 interrelated democracy goals, one of which is to access to trusted news and information. So, they say up here that they want collaborative alignment essentially on a set of shared values to guide them. And then down here they seem to contradict themselves and say, this whole thing is going to be run by Press Forward, which is independent of ideology. Or Press Forward is independent of ideology and plans to work with More Perfect. So let's go on over and let's check out what More Perfect is. So More Perfect, sorry, this is one of those sites that has black in the back. It's basically an organization is founded on 5 democracy goals, which is universal civic learning, national service and volunteering, bridging divides, trusted elections, and more representative and responsive governance, and access to trusted news and information. So it all sounds really, really good until you're like, who are these people to facilitate this and why are they doing it? So basically, it's the More Perfect organization is we the people in order to form a more perfect union. Perhaps no 11 words written down in history have ever resulted in a brighter North Star for an entire nation, let alone for the world. My concern here is that it's being run by Institute of Democracy, CEO of Office of American Possibilities, Rockefellers. Um, you see what I'm talking about. So there's a National Advisory Council. Ken Burns, I actually trust him because he makes great documentaries. But you see where I'm getting with this. When you start controlling the news, you start controlling the country or any country, and that bothers me. But I told you we would get back to Meghan Markle. So we're going to get back to Meghan Markle and the MacArthur Foundation. So here we are in the About Us section of the MacArthur Foundation. And like I said earlier, they do a lot of really, really good work at the MacArthur Foundation. I don't want to leave you with the impression that they don't. What I want to point out is the strategic placement that Meghan and Harry seem to have put themselves in so that they can connect with these particular organizations. So we do not want to give our feedback today, but the About Us section actually shows what they do, how they work, their history. They've been around for a long time, 40 years, social impact. And this is the thing. What country are they looking at? Now, Chicago obviously is, where President Obama got his start. But I was thinking this was the connection that really shot out to me was Nigeria. And those of you who know about Meghan Markle know that during one of her archetypes podcasts, which I have not listened to because I just can't even waste my time with that. She made the point of saying that she's 43% Nigerian. During the Invictus Games this year, it was all about the Nigerian team and my Nigerian sisters. The MacArthur Foundation is very heavily involved in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria, it has its own issues. All countries do. But what is particularly concerning to me is that Meghan and Harry seem to be setting the stage to make those connections with people. So, what do we know about personality types like Meghan Markle, who seems to have some sort of cluster B personality disorder? I don't know. I've only had experiences with these types of people. And what I do know about them is that they believe that everyone around them is an extension of themselves. They do not believe there are boundaries between people. If you are their husband, their child, their dog, even, you are an extension of themselves. So it would not be too far reaching for her to go, oh, I took this, genetic test and it says that I'm 43% Nigerian. Of course, there's a lot of tribes in Nigeria. So, that's a whole other issue. How can I use this? How can we use this to make ourselves more valuable, to use it as a way into a more, how can I use this to further my own ambitions? Doesn't take a lot to find out that the MacArthur Foundation is very, very heavily supportive or has a lot of programs in Nigeria. And then I find it very interesting that she announces in a huge way with Invictus, especially. I mean, that was when it really started getting pushed that she was Nigerian ancestry. And that's about the time that this partnership or this inclusion with the Archewell Foundation into these grants, this grant program to support local newsrooms in local deserts came out. And I don't think that there are any oopsie daisies within, especially this world. They're all connected. And Harry and Meghan in particular, is always trying to get in where she thinks she needs to be. That's what it looks like. That's my opinion. I don't know if Harry really even, he was in it. I don't know really how much power he ever had, though. As the second son, and as someone who, I mean, the stories came out long before he married Meghan that he was not the nicest of people. And that's just what I heard through the grapevine, you know, be it what it is. But I think it's important to look at these connections, to look at these grants. 500 million, yeah, it sounds like a lot. At the same time, it's not going to go very far when you're spreading it across an entire country. And news deserts are what they are. If people cannot support themselves working in a newsroom, they're going to go to another way of employment, essentially, where they can. And so that's what I wanted to point out to you today was this partnership, this collaboration that Archewell Foundation has joined. It's been around for a long time. They're not starting anything. They're joining something that's already begun. The challenge is, what is this thing doing? What are these grants actually doing? And I'd heard of them for many years before, Knight Foundation also, which I don't think there's time for me to go into the Knight Foundation right now, but they've given a lot of grants to local newspapers as well. My concern is when you get an organization like the Archewell Foundation, whose founder has said they want to change media, involved in a grant for local news organizations. And we saw earlier that they want commonality of insight and collaboration. That does not lead to a free press. That leads to a bot press. And the last thing any of us want is Harry and Meghan involved with a bot press. Anyway, that's what I've got for you today. I'm sorry it's a little bit stilted. There's a lot of bouncing around. And as I do more videos, I'm going to get a little smoother with it, but bear with me. And I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.